And so that's the reason I decided to write this article, because I keep having to say the same things over and over again. The problem is, Joaquin, I'm saying the same things over and over again about like birth rates and all that to myself in my own mind and to my friends. And so I kind of wanted to write a much bigger piece, getting into breaking down all of these excuses that people make as to not have children, because ultimately it's really a choice. And I think that that's overall what I was trying to say in the article, especially based on this new polling, which I think was from Pew Research, if I'm not mistaken. I can go over there and look. Let's see, is it Pew? Or yes, Pew. So Pew actually does a really good job of posting their materials, so always with the nice graphics.
Now,
So yeah.
what I wanted to ask was like, because the birth rate issue in the U.S. I mean, we have in Serbia,
Mm-hmm.
the state is paying something near like almost like a year of salary, at the lower end, like at the minimum wage salary, that
Yeah.
they're paying a year of minimum wage salary for your first kid, and then for the second, it's like something comparable, and that's pretty crazy. Like cities, different municipalities can pay in addition to that too. So it comes out to what I'm saying.
Well, yeah. Well, Joaquin, now you've opened something I didn't get into the article, which is sort of like the government solutions. And I think a lot of these government solutions are well intentioned, but I'm not quite sure if they're right. Well, first off, let's get into the real sort of meat of that sort of concept. So the concept is government pays for you to have kids. So that could be both good and bad. On the one side, it's sort of freeing that if we want people, to have children, we're going to pay them to do what we want them to do, right? And that'll actually give a lot of women a certain freedom where even, let's just say their husband is not exactly the wealthiest guy in the world, they could definitely get sort of a step up. You know what I mean? Because one of the problems in the West is it's like, well, I make, 30, I'm in America, I make $36,000 a year. How can I afford to have children? Well, it certainly answers that question. But at the same time, depending on the person, especially depending on the woman, it kind of opens the door to this sort of welfare mentality of, well, now the government pays me to have kids. I don't need no man. You see? Because it
Yeah,
kind of
you could.
replaces the
Yeah,
function of men
definitely.
in
Yeah,
society.
yeah. No, I can definitely see that. I mean, I mean, because you're really looking at the United States, if I understand, in terms of birth rate
Yeah,
issues.
it's this is an article was all the information is about America, so the article focuses on America. But again, because I'm in Russia, and because I'm sort of more focused on Russia, I'm more sort of speaking to you right now about those kind of plans. Because Russia, Hungary, your Serbia, a lot of this Eastern European space is using a similar sets of plans and logic. The Russian system is maybe the more different one, but overall they share a lot of similarities.
I mean, in the US, historically, there were more economic opportunities, but family law had evolved in such a way that in many states, it doesn't make sense to get married. And then, I know that Russia has a pretty high divorce rate, but the US is even higher.
Yeah.
And the US has one of the highest divorce rates. So when you look at the culture, because you're talking a lot about culture, but then I'm also looking at law, like, like you've been married in Russia,
Yeah.
but in the United States, like I wouldn't recommend to a young man to get married in the U.S.
Well, yeah.
Depending on the laws in his state, because just like you said, when you're talking about the state paying to have kids could exclude the need for fatherhood, like a welfare system, you said,
Yeah.
like, well, in the US, the family law incentivizes divorce. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get 50 to 70% of real assets in addition to, 80% of 70% of income as child support and alimony, then you're like, and you get to then start sleeping with your yoga instructor or your gym trainer or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
without a threat of divorce. So you can just
Well,
you can, you know what I
yeah.
mean?
Well, here,
Like a lot of women are going to do that.
Joaquin, are you familiar with the term the manosphere?
Yeah, that's what I'm actually
Okay.
getting some of this from there. So
All right, so yeah, so that's exactly it. This is what for our audience, the Manosphere is a group of basically men who've sort of sat down and analyzed what has happened with human relationships, why they're breaking down, and essentially how to win the game. There's a few different schools of thought. Each one is named after a different colored pill. This is in reference to the Matrix. The blue pill is essentially living in a fantasy world of Disney. The red pill is sort of this basically concept where, long story short, act like an alpha male and life will be good to you. And the black pill offers the option of essentially usually sort of just giving up on society if you do not meet the, let's just say, if you're not in the top 10 or 20% of men, just give up. That's usually what the black pill sort of offers. Long story
that's
short,
like that's for relationships. I mean,
yeah, that's for
black pill
relationships,
on
but
for
it also
relation.
counts
Yeah,
towards
because
marriage because Joaquin, both the red pill and the black pill are extremely skeptical of marriage, the way it works as it stands today in North America, U.S., Canada. That the divorce laws are certainly basically the mantra they always say is that it gives men 100% of the responsibility with zero authority, and this is just a doomed situation.
it has to be, Tim. It has to be doomed because responsibilities and authorities are two sides of the same coin. And there's tests you can test that. Like when people claim they have rights, and you can ask them, what responsibilities do you have to carry out those rights?
Yeah.
Right. So then, and then likewise, when you say someone has a responsibility to do something, then you can pose to determine if it's a just setup. You can pose like, what authorities do they have to see through those responsibilities?
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually see it's two sides of the same coin. So it makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't be married in the United States.
Well, yeah, and see, that's the thing is, it's again gets back to Joaquin. I'm sorry, I'm going to beat that drum. It's technocracy, where a lot of it is this organization of carrots and sticks. That see, even with you, you're happily married in Serbia, but in America you wouldn't be because of this system of carrots and sticks that the government puts in front of you. Which is really, I think, in your particular instance, is actually very telling. You see what I mean?
Right,
And
right.
why I despise technocracy, although it might be technically necessary. I'm not quite sure about that one. We'll leave that philosophical question for another day. But yeah, but the main thing is that it really seems, from the male perspective in the West, that the odds are stacked against them in marriage. I do think that there's a bit of flawed reasoning to that. One thing that I often hear is some guys who are just broke losers will say, "But she could take half of everything I own." We don't own anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There is sort of that side of it, but I can also see that the other side would be more like you have 3 kids and then all of a sudden your kids are gone. That
No,
is
no. I mean,
very
once you have
depressing.
kids and you love your kids and you're invested in them, and that's you have to have kids to know how meaningful it is,
Yeah.
how much you love your kids, and the idea of losing them. That's why you see these fights over custody. If you don't have kids, it might look like a battle of egos or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's where your heart is at when you have kids, and I think that's universal among non-sociopathic people. So,
Yeah,
but
and
what I wanted to like kind of dig on was that, because what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. When I look at the broad culture in the U.S. from the outside looking in, I can see why you have like MGTOW, like men going their own way. I can
mhm.
see why you have all of these things, but I think that there's and this is probably more in line with what you're saying. I think there's an inverse feminism of entitlement that
Yeah.
that men are also having,
Oh,
that they
absolutely. That
feel
is
that
that
they're
is the MGTOW black pill. Absolutely.
right, that they're entitled to women, that they're entitled to a relationship, that they're entitled to a successful marriage. And when you look at the sort of like the 20th century or the 19th century together have set up this idea that even the most common man is going to be married in the sense of like this middle class ideal, right? But when you look at the vast, like, long history of humanity, you can see that only 30 or 40% of men successfully reproduced.
Yeah.
So like when they look at like mitochondrial DNA and they look at where your actual, so it's only like it's like 80 or 90% of women have successfully reproduced, and only like 30 or 40% of men have successfully reproduced.
Yeah,
So
so
men die
so
in
throughout history, there
war.
have been a lot of incel losers who didn't make it,
Well, you would just call them human beings. I mean, they had incel. Yeah, they were like, these were guys who might have died in a war before they had children. They
or
might have
that,
died
or yeah, or
valiantly in
people who
battle.
died.
There were
Yeah,
illnesses, there were workplace accidents, there was poverty. I mean, you had feudal nobilities and ruling classes that with vast disproportionate amounts of wealth, and you had penniless people that were just peons, peasants, and slaves
yeah,
that worked land, and they may have reproduced but not known that they had kids, or that you had communal kind of group marriages of managed by matriarchies, and a girl would wind up pregnant, but all the children were bastards. You have to
yeah,
look at feudal medieval period, or you can look at Near Eastern or Oriental societies of the Middle East, where you actually might have had a caste system that if wealthy men had 5, 6, 10 wives, and
yeah.
poor men had 0 wives.
Well, yeah, because
So
every time one guy gains a wife, that means one guy's minus one potential wife. So yeah,
if you assume that men live on, but I think that probably when you look at human population and war,
hmm.
I think a lot of men were not wifeless; they were lifeless.
Ah,
You
I
know,
see.
you see.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but I think the pill that's hard to swallow
Hmm.
for like a lot of
Yeah,
people, a lot of guys, is on the one hand, they have they're right about the problems in family law, but they feel that they're entitled to a life which there's actually more of a competition for access to reproduction that they're not confronting.
yeah,
And women are now, the family law I think is a problem, but that has to be resolved legislatively. But what you can do in your own life, at least in terms of relationships without getting married, right,
hmm.
is you can go to the gym and you can become an interesting person and learn how to interact with women, because a lot of guys just don't get out there, and it's a big and then they become black pill about it. A lot of black pill guys are incel losers, as you're calling them.
Yeah, well, I mean, dude, like you made the comparison between feminism and like the sort of especially the black pill movement, and
Yeah.
because in a lot of ways, I've heard the accusations that feminism really I'll put it this way, it's sort of like really attractive, feminine, more let's just say successful women from a evolutionary, sexual marketplace value women don't really seem to become as feminist as women who are not winners in the system. And in some ways, feminism is almost like a reaction of how women at sort of maybe the bottom of the totem pole are trying to rig the game to get up or change the system. And in some ways, I feel that, yeah, definitely that black pill is kind of the male equivalent of that. It's it's just weird, and,
Oh,
its
absolutely.
fundamental problem is that just like I think the feminists, they actually really believe that everyone is special and you deserve love and da 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 da. And I think that this whole Disney message of you deserve this, you deserve that is very very beaten into our heads. And I think that that's where a lot of the frustration comes from these guys, is they don't understand that you have to do something with your life and be something, look decent, do something interesting, or else you're not going to get to participate in future human genetics.
Yeah,
And
I
they
mean, I
just
have a
won't accept
question. I
that.
mean, has the U.S. been conquered by a foreign power? Because, like, when you look at Germany after World War II,
Yeah.
right, and then you look at West Germany, where I think there's more information in the West about West Germany. In the East German stuff, it's like the stuff gets released from secret whatever, right,
Yeah.
post Cold War. But the educational system, what they did in West Germany, because Germany lost a total war, right?
Yeah.
So, right, and that's why the educational system was rearranged, and they developed a new field called anti-fascism studies or fascism studies.
Yeah.
And because West German society couldn't challenge the foundation of fascism as being corporatism. Like this was Mercedes, Deutsche Bank, BMW, Oppenheimer, right? That was fat, right? Instead, because they couldn't say that, they had to be like, fascism is rooted in patriarchy, toxic masculinity, nationalism. Okay. So they taught German kids that were born from the 50s and onwards that the problems in society were nationalism, patriotism, masculinity, virtue, classical architecture, right?
Yeah.
All these things that were just considered for time immemorial to be like how things are, right? And all of this got called fascism. Just like when you meet like a crazy Maoist from the 70s and like everything is fascism. So it's like but that makes sense, because when you want to castrate, when you want to demobilize a country, like because England proposed that Germany be transformed into agricultural fields, right? And in a sense that happened, but not industrially, but in the sense of Japanese grass eaters. Like it is like been transformed in many ways. Like, and when you look at German sexuality, like the levels of fetish are through the roof, which is always
I've noticed.
It's always a symptom of a mutilated culture, because sexuality is at the core of our being as animals in the world, right? As reproductive animals.
And if you get into the whole like Freudian school, it's like a reflection of our childhood to an extent. And I think Freud is different. Freud was somewhat right about that. So so again, to be not graphic is Joaquin. There are things I could sort of basically there are things that I could definitely enjoy, things that I could comprehend, but like there are some things that have come to the mainstream. I don't want to use the terminology. Let's just say watching your wife do something else somewhere else, being hit or impacted on your own body to receive pleasure. Like as a man, I can't even comprehend that.
Yeah, it's totally alien.
And I think that this has to be coming from somewhere. I think that there cannot be that high of a natural proclivity to wanting to be humiliated, be violated and destroyed and all that, especially from our standpoint as the more dominant gender.
Well, I mean, you look at the two biggest defeated powers of World War II, right? So this is like the geopolitics of sexual fetish, right?
Yeah.
Like you have
oh my
Japan,
God, you're right.
Germany. Like Japan Japan with like tentacles and weird stuff.
Oh my God, yes.
Stuff. And then Germany with rubber balls and rubber suits and stuff, like, and whips. And so this is a very strange thing that is based in the master servant dialectic, the humiliation, post-war defeat, the internalization of losing a total war, and then policies to emasculate the society by foreign powers, I would argue, so that they don't reemerge, so that they don't breed a new generation of people that get behind like a new Tojo or a new Hitler, right?
Yeah.
So the question then is, why is this happening in the U.S.? Like that was my question. Like, was the U.S. defeated by some foreign power? Because they're certainly acting like it.
Well, I can. Why is it happening? Well, in the article, I get into the overall concept is that this is very much, I would say, rooted in ideology. Now, again, we could get into the definition of what is ideology, but essentially the programming in your head, if there's a computer, there's the hardware, and then there's the Microsoft operating system, or Apple, if you should choose, or Linux. And this is really an operating system problem, because the Pew Research polls show that overall, people are just not having children, either because, for the most part, that finally they're at least being honest and saying they just don't want to, for whatever reason, or they give this list of reasons that are just so weak and so dumb and so easily broken down, like like they say, again, financial reasons. Well, this is the one I hear the most from people. And financial reasons, Joaquin, medieval times. Your ancestors came through Mexico, but I assume that somewhere they also came via Spain. So we'll say our medieval European ancestors who lived very far away from each other. Yeah. They had very little. Life was very hard, and yet they didn't seem to have a problem with having children. The next reason is having no partner, and again, that's sort of what we were talking about, the destruction of human interaction. But again, this is kind of weird because, like, even from my parents' generation, one generation ago, I can't find someone to marry who born in like the baby boomer generation. They're like, well, I didn't have children because I just couldn't find anyone. That is something new, and it is also BS. Age is listed as a factor. That's true. I mean, if you're 45 and you didn't get started, well, ma'am, I'm sorry, you missed the train there.
Yeah, for women it's very hard. For women,
Yeah,
it's very hard.
for us it's a little bit easier. But also another one. This is my least favorite, but one I'm surprised it's so low on the list. Only 9% of people, I guess, said that state of the world is the reason they don't want to have a child. And what a crock of BS that is. To say, well, it's the world is so awful. I don't want to bring children to this horrible world where people live very long. Life is pretty easy. We have all these fantastic devices like automobiles and washing machines and all this stuff to make our lives super easy. But the world is horrible. That is a total lie. Again, going back to our ancestors and the tough world they had to go through, man. It is hard. Just as an aside, I watched this some series of videos from this guy. He's like a medieval reenactor, and he's a knight, real good shape, big guy, run around in armor and all that stuff. He tried to do the day's work of a medieval peasant. He couldn't even get through like 1/5 of it. Life was hard, and yet people still. So all this stuff. Oh, and climate change is the next reason. Yeah, climate change is the reason not to have children. Go F yourself.
Is that like more? Is climate change part of the state of the world? Or
yeah, I think it is, but for some reason they divided it into a separate category. If you combine those into one thing, it goes up to 15% of respondents said that was one of the reasons.
I could understand people. That's just in the U.S., right?
This is only America.
You're familiar with the Boomer Steve meme, right?
Boomer
so
Steve.
For example, that the minimum wage salary, if you were like a high school kid working in a movie theater in 1971, right? That's like equivalent to like $50,000, $60,000 today. Okay. So I can understand the financial, because people don't compare themselves to medieval peasants. People keep up with the Joneses. And
yeah. Oh yeah, dude. If you compare yourself to like my especially my grandfather. Dude, my grandfather, by the standards of my life, was loaded, and he was a chief. He was a mechanic who then bought his own gas station where he fixed cars. But so dude, I definitely, you're talking to someone who had kids looking that my parents had a lot more than I did, or well, now it's kind of weird because I'm in Russia and the value of money here is different. But as an American, I could see my parents had more money than I did, and my grandparents had way more money than they did.
Okay, but also like, because I'm, all right, this is what I do here, right?
Yeah.
But we're two guys who have left the United States and did not marry in the United States. And some of those reasons that you're kind of saying are bullshit are probably at some level connected to your own reasons.
For leaving America?
Well, I don't know that you could do what you do in the United States and that your earnings would be sufficient to have a family in the U.S.
Dude, one of the things that I can tell you is that I went from being lower middle class. I went from when I decided to leave America, my life looked like this. I did sort of design work for a company that makes, I won't mention their name because I don't want them to I can't describe it, but basically fashion. Joaquin, I was in the fashion industry. So anyways, I would make different designs for clothing and accessories and all this stuff for this particular company that will go unnamed. Now, as a fashion designer, I had enough money to pay rent and to eat, and that was it. And Joaquin, I am a very cheap person. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very financially responsible. I'm very cheap. I always want to have money in the bank. I had nothing. That's one of the reasons why I left. Is it was like, okay, I finished college. In theory, this should be a good job in the fashion industry. I'm the only designer they had, so it was me or nothing. I can afford cheeseburgers, and that's it.
There you go.
So so now my life is different. Dude. Like although my house is a complete, I just want to say that although my house is a complete piece of junk and it's small and I fixed it up, I bought it in cash here.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference. That's a step up.
That's a huge thing. And the freedom that you have in your daily life to do things that are interesting to you. That's not a freedom that people have in the US once they have a family or if they're a certain age,
Yeah.
I mean, I know entrepreneurs that say, hey, take 5 years, live out of your car, get used to having nothing so that you can make, you get used to high risk, high intensity investment in work and thinking, strategic thinking. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying about the cultural, but you can't ignore the legal and economic framework in the U.S., which totally disincentivizes, having a family. I mean,
Well,
the legal is partly economic, but the evisceration of the middle class, it's like men are not like there's something called the social contract.
yeah.
So men are not obligated, just like women are not they're not what are they called? They're not obligated to have kids.
Yeah.
Neither men are not obligated. Like society is a social contract, and if you have workers who just give up on work because the conditions are do you psychologically whip them, or do you
Yeah.
be like, oh, we're not paying you enough, or we're not, I mean, it's not like we're not living in a
Well,
chivalric code system where, and nor could we, because the United States is run by a rapacious, oligarchy run by the banking sector.
Well, here,
So
let
then,
me just say one thing or two about this mentality issue. Is before I had children, right? And I lived in Kazakhstan for 2 years, and then I lived here for a few years before I met the mother of my kids there, right? And during that time, I heard outside the borders of Moscow. Moscow's very cosmopolitan. It doesn't really count. So you're talking Siberia, the open plains around Moscow, Kazakhstan. The number one thing is, why don't you have kids? Who's going to take care of you when you're old? Why don't you have kids? Who's going to take care of you when you're old? This mantra of beating the drum of that you can hear from people all over. I think maybe in the Soviet Union they said that. I don't know, but it's a much better mantra than you hear in America. You're talking about finances, but so one of the problems is I think people are very short-sighted. Is today when you're in your 30s or 20s or whatever, was a man you should wait to have kids. That's nothing we should tell people. We'll get to that. But when you're in your 30s and you think, oh, how much money I'm losing on my kids, da da da. But who is going to take care of you when you're old? I mean, Social Security, even though it might seem good to Russian eyes, Social Security in America is not that great. And so in a lot of ways, here's the bigger picture. In a lot of ways, the state has sort of replaced a lot of the basically the social contract of old, of how people would take care of each other, your children would take care of you when you're old. The states try to be the replacement for all of this, including religion and everything. And in a lot of ways, I don't even know if it's really working. I kind of rather have people rely on their families and stuff like that.
There was a vlogger, like one of the early YouTubers from over a decade ago, named Karen Strong. She's kind of a libertarian.
Yeah, I know her. Yeah.
Girl
Not
writes
personally.
what? And I think her first 5 or 10 videos, she did tremendous research on the history of family law, gender, and sort of like from an evolutionary perspective, evolutionary psychology and law, and sort of the interaction between the two. And I think she was a big part of realizing certain things about human nature that without that understanding, you're kind of lost at sea.
Yeah.
So shout out to her. But the thing is that what she gets into is what you're talking about the state. The state is actually like a surrogate man.
Yeah.
So then if the state is heavily involved, then it does displace the role of the man.
Yeah.
So the most obvious relationship is between women and the state, right? The most obvious relationship is like you have women, and then women are preferred as sort of like the middle managers of the corporate state apparatus.
Yeah.
In psychology, women, both men and women, prefer to deal with women when it comes to bureaucratic or managerial issues. And for whatever reason, I don't always find that.
Because there's less aggression. There's more higher, as our psychologist friends would say, higher agreeableness, lower aggression.
Lower aggression, but probably higher passive aggressivity, and I see that that passive aggressivity has become a way that males have tried to emulate forced feminization, is that they
Yeah.
become more passive aggressive instead of just saying, bro, you're wrong, I disagree because this and that, or
Yeah.
have you thought about it this way? They don't even know how to disagree in a constructive way, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's actually a lacking
Well, yeah, I
of
was actually
sure-footedness.
just watching some material about how they think that one of the reasons with the whole rise of like the the school shootings and all that stuff, or these public acts of terrorism, that one of the things is that when you're telling men to that they should express their emotions, that in some ways it's actually leading to this. I think it's a little bit of a loose argument, but essentially, because again, I've myself noticed that I've heard a million times from a lot of people around, women around me from the West, anyways, that men need to be more emotional. Why not? And I tell them, well, my emotions say I want to punch someone's face in. Are you sure about that? um, and I think that every man who's masculine, generally, when something goes wrong, your first instinct is smash.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's
Karen,
why, and
Karen
I think
Strawn
that's why we want
actually,
to control ourselves. And for men, I think it's
yeah.
actually the opposite. It's triumphing over your emotions to
Mm.
attain a state of stoicism that makes you a fantastic part of society. So yeah, but anyways, I just thought that was an interesting concept that in a lot of ways, you're telling men be emotional, and then their emotions tend to be violent because men are more violent inherently. So it is interesting,
Yeah,
interesting
yeah. Well,
concept.
Karen Strawn like tackles this sort of gaslighting of men that's happening in society, where they're telling that on the one hand they're being told, "Oh, express your emotions," but that's not actually when men express their emotions. Women are turned off
Oh
by that,
yeah,
So and so it's actually women that are being misinformed, and so what something that I've developed in the past is looking at how culture has what's called the community of women. So,
yeah,
historically, communities of women were real existing communities of women. So the women in your life were real human beings that were actually your aunt, your sister, your best friend from school, people that you're connected to maybe in a village or
yeah.
whatever. And unless they're messed up in the
Well,
head,
yeah.
which sometimes happens, you
Keenan, I just
know,
want to say that here's a model. So this is exactly what you're saying is okay. So you tell men, women want you to be more emotional. So let's just say you be more emotional in a feminine way. So a woman really hurts your feelings over something. Feminine option is crying and flipping out and being hysterical. That is utterly repulsive to women. So basically, by doing that, you've lost that girl. Well, what's a very masculine yet super emotional response to something? We just talked about this. Violence. That's also not a great option. So it
yeah,
doesn't
no,
seem to work either way.
it can be attractive to women under certain conditions, and but it can also attract the wrong type of women
Oh,
who
certainly.
but it's but at least
But
it's more
but
rooted
Joaquin,
in our
really,
biology,
the thing
right?
is I would say that actually the masculine response, be it destructive and harmful, is probably actually more attractive.
It is. It's more attractive because there's different levels that this operates on. But
Yeah.
with the community of women, and I think when you hear this out, you'll appreciate it. Is that now today you have an industry of advice for women through virtual spaces, or through celebrities, through Instagram, through social media. But even before that, going back to the 70s, you had different magazines that were like lifestyle magazines with advice columns and
Yeah.
stuff, and you had TV shows, you had Oprah, you had all this
Yeah.
stuff that always had these latent advice and marriage and dating, and or
Hmm.
Sex in the City. You had
Oh, that is
neat
the
like
number one. That is a.
culprit. Yeah, yeah. So
I'm
hear
not.
this
It's
out.
not. I don't think
Yeah,
it
but
is
hear this
actually
out.
a
Hear it out.
psyop, but it basically
Hold on.
functions
Yeah,
as a psyop.
yeah, it does. What you need to hear though is that this has worked against the interests of women, the development of this this artificial community of women, because there's a market interest when you give women bad advice that's supposed to be good advice, but because your packaging is good advice. When you
Hmm.
give women bad advice, you're creating clients and customers for life.
Yeah.
It's just like big pharma. So then these women are constantly, perpetually single. They're perpetually miserable. And then the advice they're being given is designed to keep them single and miserable with the wrong
but
attitude and the wrong,
temporarily feel good.
temporarily.
You just be
Well,
yourself. You just wait, and the right guy will come
yeah,
along.
yeah, it
As
manipulates
opposed,
their
yeah,
human interest. It manipulates their sense of self. It's flattery because it doesn't challenge anyone to change their patterns or behavior. So it's based in flattery. It's saying you're perfect how you are. But men have not been able to interact with this because of the way that women, the toxic, the type of advice that women are in, lifestyle expectations being given to women. So I very much appreciate what you've written here. But how would you address then the broader question of why should men engage in, because you're talking about a population decline issue,
yeah.
and right, I mean, governments have solved this through immigration.
Yeah. Oh, well, the real reason is maybe why should. I think it's more that. See, when you ask why should men, this is question is really posed from the standpoint of individualism. It's like, why should I do something? Well, the problem is this: why should I do this or that? Is really the real core cause of the problem, because it's not so much about you. If we want to create some sort of system that's more self-centered, yet makes men want to have children, it is your family name. We have to remember. Why are Fords called Ford or Chevrolet, or even the Japanese cars? I believe Honda and Suzuki are also last names. Because in the past, when men were more aggressive, they wanted to put their stamp on things. They wanted to have their little empire. And Joaquin, what I would offer is actually a much bigger package of ideas. Maybe I'm a psychopath, like the psychopaths of the early 20th century that wanted to sort of redo society. But I think on a greater level, we need to change a lot of the orientation of society. And if you think about it, men need to be motivated to achieve and to have children and to have this, big family line and to feel like they're the pater familias or whatever. You know what I mean? And I think that, because that's one of the reasons where I'm a more masculine guy, and that's one of the reasons why I want to have kids. I don't want to be a chump. I want to have people carry on my last name. I want to have people, like I said, I heard the argument, take care of you when you're older. And that certainly worked on me, and I think that that's part of it. One of the more simple things is if we send a message, right? So we had Sex and the City, right? So Sex and the City says that basically it offers women this lifestyle where essentially all men are garbage, and they're always going to chase after you. And if there's even the slightest thing wrong, get rid of them. Men are just there for sex or whatever. They should worship. It's very much this sort of female-centric fantasy. Well, we could offer men all sorts of fantasies. James Bond is a fantasy. We were talking about anime. There's a lot of fantasy in anime, especially these weird like power fantasies and harem anime and all this stuff, right? But what I think we really need to do is the solution is really offer men this vision of that they are the Roman pater familias, the authority, that their job is to go out there and be this sort of emperor within their own realm. And I think that that's something that's very attractive to men. Is we've talked even in this episode just about how with the whole family court laws, how men really have very little authority over what they do. And I think that authority, the ability to be, because basically, okay, I've talked to a lot of people about what we could do to create a new political system. And one man from Georgia said that the real core of it should be the family. And I was kind of like, that's lame. But when I thought about it, in a lot of ways, if you think about it, within a country, we have the emperor at the top and the government. Then you have usually different regions and republics and maybe your city or town. But maybe the smallest unit of the state should be the family. And if men are offered the opportunity to be head of that little teeny tiny state, like at least for now in Russia we are, dude, it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling, Joaquin, to be the boss, to be the leader, to have authority over a wife and children. I even tell my own son often, because he gets sort of fired up. He's kind of passionate individual, I'll put it that way. And I tell him, I know you don't like the rules. Get older, get money, get tough, then you'll be the boss. You'll have your own kids, you can make the rules, and you'll be the leader. You see, that's the
Yeah.
offer. This is
Yeah.
very much a matter, Joaquin, of I would say, I don't know, propaganda, media. That's why I use the word ideology in this article, because it's very much a way that we perceive things that is a core issue. Of course, you're getting more into that, like, Latima, it doesn't matter what your perceptions are if you have $5 in your pocket. That's a little bit of a different issue. I understand that, but in response to your most recent question, it is very much this sort of ideological positioning sort of answer.
Well, on that note, I'm satisfied with this conversation. So.
All right. Well, I am too. Okay, friends. Joaquin has called it, and I'm feeling pretty good. So I'm glad I answered your question there. I thought I was going to drop the ball on that one. But anyways, Joaquin and friends, we will see you in 1 week's time. Yeah, and Merry Christmas, because this episode should come out a few days after Christmas in the West is over, but before Christmas in the East. So anyways, Merry Christmas, friends.